Alrighty, this is General Science, and we are starting the second semester, although we probably haven't gotten as far as we should have, but that's okay. We'll just keep plodding along through our course and do the best we can. So today we're kind of in the picking up in the middle of chapter 5. So on page 112 is where we want to start reading. We're going to be reading starting with the section proteins. That's an O, not a 6. That's not protems either. Good grief. What a way to start the second semester, right? Proteins. I'll fix my O. We might as well have everything look as best as it can. There we go. Proteins. All right, so we're going to start there. So clearly, proteins would be a term you want to define. Remember your sections in your notebook, right? Your vocabulary section, your timeline, your big ideas, your comp check, your experiments, and chapter review, chapter test. Right? So what I want you to do is read just the bottom of page 112, top of page 113 until you come to experiment 5.3. And you're going to be completing experiment 5.3. I think it's a pretty simple experiment. Now, in that reading heading up to experiment 5.3, you're going to be told about a scientist is named, so this might be something for your timeline. There, okay. Looking at experiment 5.3, some juice glasses, egg, vegetable oil, corn syrup, white vinegar, rubbing alcohol, and a measuring teaspoon. Right, probably you have all of those things in your house, although the rubbing alcohol you may not have. Okay, and you don't want to get. There's two different kinds of alcohol that are sold, like at drugstores, like maybe a Walgreens or a Rite Aid, something like that. You want to make sure you get the one that's labeled rubbing alcohol. Now, when I've gone in to get the rubbing alcohol is usually at the, well, it was a Rite Aid store. I don't know if you have that store where you're at, but anyway, it was actually at the bottom. It was a little bit harder to see. The isopropyl alcohol or something like that is the one that's readily visible typically. So make sure you get rubbing alcohol for this. And that's something you may not have in your house, but probably you have some small glasses. Hopefully you have an egg, right? Probably have some vegetable oil. Maybe you have corn syrup. It says there that fruit juice will work if you don't have corn syrup. White vinegar, probably you have. All right. And so then there's the instructions. By the way, I recommend that you review, I think it's pages 9 through 12 in your textbook, where he talks about how he expects your lab report to be done. Okay. We've probably gotten a little bit casual in our lab reports. Not all of us, but some of us, or some parts, right? The data section and the summary section shouldn't just be repeats of each other, right? Review pages 9 through 12, understand each of those sections. Look at what he has as his example. Try to follow that example and produce your lab report in a similar way, okay? And in your conclusion, don't be too general or too obvious in your conclusion, okay? In your conclusion, be as particular as you can about what the experiment showed to you, and don't be afraid in your conclusion to if it's true. I mean, don't just make it up, but if it's true, don't be afraid to say, I was surprised to find that, if you were thinking that things were going to go differently in your experiment, okay? You don't gain more points, or you're not better off necessarily if you make it seem as though you knew exactly what was going to happen before you started the experiment. Now, maybe you will know, then that's fine. But I'm simply saying it's no detriment if in your conclusion you end up saying, I did not even expect the conclusion that it came to, right? I expected sample A to be the one that reacted, and it was sample B. That's perfectly okay, right? The experiment is about following the instructions carefully, right? Measuring things out carefully. And this is one reason why I would appreciate having pictures of your experiment, right? Because, obviously I won't be there with you doing the experiment, but when I see pictures, I can see, oh, it looks like you understood what you were doing, right? So pictures of your experiment would be great. It gives me a sense of having been there to see you do the experiment and have a sense that, okay, you really did it, and it looks like you were setting things up correctly, right? And so the experiments are about following the directions carefully and, having an idea going into the experiment of what you think will happen, being mindful and observant and recording those observations as you're doing the experiment, writing out the steps that you took to perform the experiment as though the person you're writing for them has never seen the instructions for the experiment, doesn't know anything about the experiment, and then producing a meaningful conclusion that is either, the kind of conclusion that is, oh yeah, so what I thought would happen actually did happen when, whatever happened, or wow, I was surprised at what happened. And both of those are just as good conclusions. Okay. Now, please do the entirety of experiment 5.3 and produce your lab report, and then pick up the reading on page 113 after the experiment in the text, right? Because typically he talks about what you should have learned in that experiment, and I think it's going to be better for you to do the experiment without having read what he says, you see. And then you do the experiment, you have your conclusions, you think about what it showed you, what it taught you, and then you read his conclusions and you find out probably more that experiment taught you than you realized. Take note of any bold words that become vocabulary words, like proteins is a bold word. On page 114, there's hemoglobin, which is a bold word. Now remember, this section is about proteins, so don't just run past the word hemoglobin. How does it relate to proteins, right? Why would he bring up hemoglobin in a section about proteins? Okay. Understand that. Enjoy the picture that he's got there for you. A couple of people are named near the conclusion of this section, just before the comprehension check on page 114. Edward Reichert, Amos Brown. So that looks like timeline information. Remember, when you put somebody on your timeline, provide some kind of a date for that person, give some kind of information about that person. And so then once you finish your reading, then go ahead and answer comprehension check 5.6 there, okay? Right, so by the time you're done with this section on proteins, you will have completed experiment 5.3 with a nice lab report, and maybe with some pictures for me to see as well. And you will have answered comprehension check 5.6. Okay, and that will take you to essentially the end of page 114. So we're looking at pages 112 through 114. All right, so that's what you're doing for this assignment, and do it well. Take your time with your experiment. Make sure you do it carefully and properly, and that you get the most out of it. Okay, on to your assignment.